morning. Thank you for joining us on Behind the Gavel with Jason today. I'm your host, Neil Casey Auction Company, Jason Roski. And every week we get together and have interviews some interesting guests. And today I'm really excited to be joined by my good friend, Dr. Raymond Doswell from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. He's the Vice President of Curatorial Services there at the museum. Raymond, thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be with you, Jason.
Excellent. So for those of you who don't know who Raymond is, and I'm sure everybody's heard of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, but Raymond is the Vice President of Curatorial Services. He's been with the museum since 1995. In that time, he's been all kinds of roles there. As anybody who's ever been in a museum sitting knows, you kind of do a little bit of everything when you're involved with it. He hosts a lot of really interesting people. He also speaks on the behalf of the museum. He's been on C-SPAN, PBS, CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, ESPN, Showtime, Canadian Broadcasting Company, BBC, Japanese television, local stations around the country, and who knows where else you've appeared in those for those things. He's also hosted some really cool people over the years. Presidents Clinton and Bush, First Lady Michelle Obama, Al Gore, Colin Powell, Jesse Jackson. Recent history, recently important, Chadwick Boseman was at the museum when 42 was released with Harrison Ford. Pro athletes from baseball, football, soccer, and every other kind of major sport you could think of. Raymond himself has a bachelor's in history from Monmouth College, a master's in history from University of California, doctor of education from Kansas State here in the Midwest. And Raymond, thank you so much for joining us today. And tell us a little bit about how your path got you to be at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and what it's been like there for 25 years. That's a long time to be any place.
Wow, yeah, 25 years has gone by in a blink of an eye, but yeah, I have an interesting path here. I am actually just a little old history teacher by training. That is my passion, being someone who taught history and social studies. That is what I went to school for initially at Monmouth College in Illinois. I'm from the St. Louis area. But through that work and teaching briefly, I did learn about public history, which, of course, for some who don't know, the public history typically includes museums, archives, historic preservation, and that nature of care for historical objects or historical manuscripts or historical information. And through that, I got an internship before actually doing my first teaching job in the St. Louis area, but I got an internship in California at the University of California, Riverside, to learn about public history. Was able to teach for a year, got an opportunity to go back to California to do graduate school work, and then learned about the Baseball Museum. So while studying history, getting a master's degree in American history, mostly African American history and mostly music and working on the history of slavery and slave songs and jazz actually, but learned about the Baseball Museum in its infancy. And part of my program was to do an internship at a museum, and I wrote to the Baseball Museum looking for an internship, but they were just starting. They didn't have any staff or anyone that could supervise me, but I ended up at the Smithsonian for my internship and worked there for a few months. But after that was done, it was time to graduate, and I wrote back to the Baseball Museum saying, well, I need a job now. And they said, well, we don't have any curators or anything like that. Maybe you could do it. So they interviewed me, and that was in 1995, and I've been here ever since, as you noted, in changing roles from I was the museum's first curator, which is to take care of primarily curators and maybe in an art museum or even a history museum and a larger institution, research and write about the objects and help interpret the materials and the photos and the stories there. But I do that, but I'm the only museum professional here, so occasionally I have to dabble in being a registrar and managing the collections, being a librarian, maybe a little preservation work. And I have to be a bit of a jack of all trades, and I'm not necessarily a master of any of them, but I should know where the answers are to help people find information they need, but also to take care of the collection. So And in that work, over the years, working also with Kansas State University on educational programming is how I got my doctorate, as they were helping us with educational programming. And they've fashioned it so that I could get my doctoral degree at the same time.
That's really awesome. And for folks who are watching, if you have questions for Raymond, please go ahead and post them below. We'll answer them if we can during the live broadcast here. So yeah, you're talking about, I was just thinking about that. The museum, the idea of the museum was 1990 and you started in 95. So you've got to be one of the very few people there that, like, you've been there for almost the entirety of the museum. What kinds of changes have you noticed in how the museum, obviously had a big expansion several years ago. You have the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center coming online at the YMCA building, which I think we'll talk about when we talk about the history of baseball. What kind of changes have you seen at the museum and the response to it from the general public?
Well, I think one of the things is that, or among the things, is that we're still a very small institution in terms of staffing and how we can operate. But as the profile of the history has grown, and I think that has to do in large part with the things that we've been able to do nationally and internationally, such as players' reunions, at least two that we've held that have gotten national press of what were the living Negro League players, our ability to help in researching films and doing traveling exhibitions and things like that, and getting the interest of the media towards our efforts to preserve this history have raised the profile of the museum. And in doing so, I think the general public probably thinks that we're probably a larger institution than what we are, and comparatively to, say, an institution like the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which has a myriad of staff, a full library, set up research center, and all kinds of things. And of course, just over the years, the age of the internet and the exponential growth and access to information uh, gives people an expectation that they want things faster and getting information faster. Because we're small, we're still not able to maybe do it in the same level as maybe some other institutions, but we're growing and we're trying to get there. And at the same time, we've been successful in raising the profile of the history so folks can appreciate it. At the same time, and as you noted, we've had some celebrity visitors that come to the museum, which also raises the profile, including Major League Baseball players and celebrities, politicians, the famous and the infamous, as I often say. Uh, but the support of Major League Baseball too is helping us grow. The support of baseball fans has helped us grow. I think even being able to be in a position at a time when, for example, here the Kansas City Royals had some success, allowed for increased media attention. And I mean, it really starts with uh, a big part of that starts with the MLB All-Star Game in 2012, and has grown since then. Of course, the Royals had subsequent success after that, which raised a profile with other national media. And we were fortunate for many years to be blessed with a great spokesman in John Buck O'Neill, who was out there as a great ambassador for baseball, but for Kansas City, helping to raise the profile of the museum. And as a result, we've opened and expanded our more permanent facility here since in 1997. Visitors have flocked to the museum. On a normal year, we welcomed 65 to 70,000 visitors to the museum. Kansas City is a robust convention town in a normal year as well, which also helps. And I think you find that out of town visitors are surprised by the amount of things that they could do in this town. And people could just stumble upon the baseball museum. And our profile is raising the city nationally on a level with the Nelson Atkins and the World War I Museum and the Truman Library.
Yeah, and you're right. We talk to out-of-towners all the time, and they're just amazed at how much culture and historically relevant and important things happened in, around, because, and by Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys do an amazing job. I've been there many times personally with my boys, with Boy Scouts, all those kinds of things. That's a great museum to go to. If you're watching, you're ever in Kansas City, please stop by and check it out. You mentioned player reunions, and Buck O'Neill. Recently we lost Lou Brock and Bob Gibson. The Negro Leagues have not been around since the early '60s. Are there any players left?
We estimate from our mailing list, around 100 to 150.
Wow.
And let me qualify that because what players are left, it depends on who you ask. So there's and I know that sounds kind of strange, but let me explain. So, um, uh, the Negro Leagues, as we define it, is business structure of Black baseball leagues, which began in 1920 here in Kansas City. And the meeting that was founded at the Paseo YMCA building which still stands around the corner here on Paseo and 18th, between 18th and 19th Street. And out of that business structure, there were several teams, mostly Midwestern teams, but some out of the East as well, which lasted up until about 1960. The core of those teams, of which there were many teams over the period that kind of ebbed and flowed, um, those teams, the core of those teams and those players um, lasted to a point where by 1955 they were starting to fade. And so there are about maybe 100 or so of those players still around who played on those teams. There are all kinds of other levels of baseball that
Mm,
interacted with that top tier. Community teams, company sponsored teams, teams that they just weren't part of the league business structure, but were our own businesses. And again, was not it was not uncommon for them to say, for example, a team in Wichita, Kansas wasn't part of the formal Negro Leagues, but the Kansas City Monarchs, who were, would play them maybe annually as the Monarchs would travel to Wichita to play exhibition games and other things to earn extra money outside of the league structure. All right. That was one of the unique things about the Negro Leagues is that they played leagues, they played in leagues, they played a league schedule, but sometimes they could play other games. Um, and so there are tiers of these black leagues, but everybody kind of just lumps them in as Negro League, so to speak. And that's not how we see it. It's just different. It's just a different level of baseball. So, but communities, now that the Negro Leagues are very popular, they want to celebrate those teams as well. But to be
mm,
frank, that records of even the formal Negro Leagues are not robust. And so records of these minor teams are even more scarce.
mm,
So uh, I there could be teams that someone would tell me about. I've never heard of them,
right.
So, but it's good that the communities want to promote them and remember them. But really, that history is really in that community. There's no record database of these minor teams, and so some of those teams lasted a little bit longer. So some of those players are still alive and much younger than say those who played in the heyday. So that number could grow from the 100 that I mentioned to an additional 150 to be 200 to 300 players again. So it depends on who you ask, but it is different. There's a difference. That experience is important, but it's a different experience than what we might call the Negro major leagues, for lack of a better descriptor.
Do you have any idea how many different leagues there were?
So we estimate, well, from the standpoint of defining the Negro Leagues, we're about 6 to 8 leagues that were part of that connection to that 1920 structure. Um, and again, they didn't all last between 1920 and 1960. They started and stopped and things like that. But it was
Mm,
about 6 to 8 different leagues in over uh, um, 30 different communities, roughly about 70 to 75 teams. Again, not all operating at the same time, but over time, uh, or the more formal Negro leagues that we talked about. But as I said, there still were these other leagues, industrial leagues, and other things that may or may not have interacted with those formal major leagues. And occasionally, as I just to use the example I used earlier, the Monarchs going to Wichita, and the team in Wichita for a while was called the Monrovians. There was a team there, and it might not have been uncommon for, say, the Monarchs to see a player on one of those minor teams and say, "Hey, you could come join us," and they could recruit players that way, and then take them on the road, and then they might play for a game or two or become superstars. You never know.
yeah, it's kind of like A ball and double A ball now. It's almost the smaller leagues are almost like the minor leagues. It sounds like.
Yeah, it was. Although they didn't function in that way, and occasionally you might get a kind of a loose business association that allowed it to seem like it was a minor league, but for the most part, there was no formal uh, minor league or farm team structure for the Negro Leagues.
Interesting, interesting. So you mentioned the main league, Negro Leagues Baseball League that we talk about and think about was started just around the corner from where you're sitting right now, the YMCA, 100 years ago. I mean, it's 1920, right? It's a 100th
Right.
anniversary. One of the
February
things,
February 1920 was when the meeting was held between mostly Midwestern team owners at that time to hammer out what would become the formation of the Negro National League. There were independent black baseball teams between the late 1800s and especially around the early 1900s, but without that league structure, agreeing to play common opponents on a schedule. Everyone was claiming that they were the best team and the best champions, and in ways, having a league helped stabilize the teams themselves for financial gain.
right? And so the 100-year anniversary, you guys did something really cool. I don't know who came up with this, but the tipping your cap, and I put the website there, tippingyourcap.com. I think is a really neat thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how that, I guess, project or
Well,
event or idea came to fruition?
well, the idea of tipping. Well, first of all, tipping your cap to an opponent on the baseball field is a sign of respect, and it's an idea that Mr. Kendrick, Bob Kendrick, our president, and myself kind of floated around for many years. We talked about a way to see if it wouldn't it be great symbolically if all the fans and all the players at a baseball game for one day would symbolically tip their cap in honor of the Negro Leagues. And so that idea has been floating around for many years, but it came to fruition this year, partly because of the pandemic. Major League Baseball was going to host a special Negro League tribute game or series of games, Negro League Day, where the teams would wear the patches commemorating the 100th anniversary of the leagues. And there would be celebrations throughout the stadiums. This would have been in late June, but of course, the pandemic canceled and postponed that. They eventually did it in August, but without the fans, of course. But it was supposed to happen in late June. So Ms. Kendrick came up with this idea of maybe we could at least at that same time in which the original game was scheduled, try to do something to or a media campaign that would help promote the Negro Leagues and honor the anniversary. The actual anniversary is in February, so this would have been the in-season celebration. And so he turned to Joe Posnanski, who was a former Kansas City Star columnist who now does national sports writing, and he leveraged some other friends to figure out a way that maybe we could do this social media campaign at the time that we would have done the games with Major League Baseball. And they came up with this tipping your cap, getting notable people in society to do a virtual salute. And that turned into famous sports celebrities doing that, but at the same time allowing the general public to also do that. And the icing on the cake was that our four living former presidents all wanted to contribute to the effort. And so they all did a video or a message as part of the website. And then it just steamrolled from there. Major League Baseball, the commissioner, the players union, and then the individual players themselves, and then athletes from other sports like Michael Jordan, and then celebrities and movie stars and other folks all wanted to be part of that. And it has exploded. And we had a wonderful website, and MLB Network picked it up. Local and national news stories picked it up, and it just became just a great awareness piece, and it helped raise some money for the museum.
Well, let's jump to that real quick. If people are watching this, we got a few more questions. But if you want to support the museum, if you're not in Kansas City, you're not going to be here for a while, NLB.com/shop. They have some really cool things. In fact, I need to get myself a Monarchs jersey. Seeing Patrick Mahomes sport that last week was a reminder that I don't have one. I've got a bunch of hats around, but I need to get the jersey to
Yeah, you
What's your
got to have the
favorite?
whole outfit, and you got to coordinate.
I ain't that cool, brother. I'm too old to put that. Put the whole outfit on.
Oh yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
um, one of the things you mentioned about, and one of the cool things about any museum, at least for me, is the objects in it. And the NLBM has some amazing pieces, both contemporary sculpture to recreate the Field of Dreams, I think you call it, with the players, but then artifacts. And then, Geddy Lee donated that huge collection of signed baseballs by former Negro Leagues players. What kinds of objects is the museum looking for or not looking for? And then, as a follow up to that, we'll ask how should people approach the museum? But tell us what kinds of things you talk about records of these smaller independent leagues. I would imagine anything like that would be important or interesting to you guys. What things are you looking for and not looking
Well, first of all, if folks need help with items, we're happy to look at them and see what's available. We're not looking to buy things off the street. I'll tell you that.
for? Right.
And folks often come in expecting us to be able to operate like the Antiques Roadshow and give appraisals and things like that. I'm not a qualified appraiser. I'm not a qualified authenticator. Um, I can tell you what aspects of your item are going to be important to authentication and appraisal, but I can't tell you what anything with any kind of authority what it's worth.
Right.
Um, Having said that, what the museum has kind of prioritized a few things more recently because we've been looking a lot for noteworthy documents and manuscripts and photographs, which is really what's out there more abundantly. These kinds of content things help us to be able to reuse those items in certain ways to help the general audiences that we deal with because we're trying to also be a research facility. So that means movie and television folk call us looking for this or that. Kids doing National History Day projects are looking for resources. And so photographs and things are something that we've prioritized. More recently, we've prioritized things that deal with the transition between the Negro Leagues and Major Leagues, the
Mm.
integration of baseball. Um, and to be honest, anything that's after 1975 or really even after 1960 isn't as important to us. And just because it's a black baseball player doesn't mean that we need that item. It's really those things before 1960 that make the most sense for us. Um, but we'll look at it and we'll see if there's a way to add it or at least keep it from a collection standpoint. That's fine. It may not be something that we could use in the exhibits, but we're not looking to buy things that way. We need to have things vetted by people like you and other auction houses and experts to make sure that it's authentic. Because when we take it in as a nonprofit, we've got to insure it. We've got to invest if we use it in a display, investing monies for cases and security of those items. And as a public steward, as a nonprofit, um, we've got to account for it in a certain way. And if we're not going to be able to use it effectively, I tend not to want to take it even as a donation and certainly
Right.
not to purchase the item. Um, we are so things for from a history museum standpoint that I try to also look for are things that allow us to help further the story or tell the story. There could be a really neat item that could be extremely expensive or extremely valuable, but if it doesn't really help us tell a story or if I can't build the story around it, it's less useful to me to make all those other investments that I just said about, the cases, the security, and everything else that we want to be able to take advantage of. Um, so things that allow us to tell a story or have an interesting story connected to it are things that really perk my interest. Um, and that could be more contemporary things. For example, um, I wouldn't normally take a store bought Jackie Robinson replica jersey in the museum. That's not something
Mm.
I'm looking for. We got one recently though, because but does have a very interesting story to a part of the exhibit that we were adding. We added an exhibit or working on an exhibit about Jackie Robinson in how he's been in tribute lately because the number 42 is retired through baseball. Many major league players have retired or have honored him with different things on their uniforms, even special shoes and things like that. It just shows Robinson's legacy, and that shows the legacy of the Negro Leagues. So modern things we normally wouldn't take, but we have this Jackie Robinson jersey. It's one that they sold at the Hall of Fame, so there's nothing special about it except who had the jersey, and it was given to us by Colonel Terry Virts, Virts. Who's Colonel Virts? Colonel Virts is an Air Force commander who flew on the space shuttle, and he was commander of the space shuttle, and he wore that jersey in space. Uh, and he was a big baseball fan and came to the museum and donated that jersey to us. So that kind of shows the legacy of Jackie Robinson. So an ordinary jersey that anybody could buy is elevated because of the connection to him and that story, which goes along next to a signed Mariano Rivera jersey for the New York Yankees. Did not play in the Negro Leagues, but his number was 42. The last person who had permission to wear 42 after Robinson's number was retired. So those jerseys hang together to show the impact of Jackie Robinson's legacy. And also next to that is another just Monarchs replica jersey, but it was worn on screen by Chadwick Boseman in the film 42 was one of his costumes. So again, showing the Robinson legacy all there together. So those are interesting things that you can't get. Things that allow us to tell the story or further the story are the things that really perk our attention. Some people probably have a lot of what's very popular in the hobby of collecting memorabilia is multiple signed baseballs, like maybe the entire New York Yankees team or St. Louis Cardinals team or a ball like that. That's a great piece, a great collector's piece. Is something that I hate having at the museum because I can't effectively display that because it's got too many signatures on it. And so memorabilia experts and folks who like memorabilia are get really geeked over that. A museum curator, at least me personally as a curator, I don't like those because it's too difficult to try to figure out how to effectively display that and tell that story, unless there's a unique story behind it, of which we have one, and there is a unique story. I'll spare you that because it's too long to tell the story, but it belonged to someone's family, and there's a great story behind it, and the ball came from Roy Campanella. We do have that multi-signed baseball on display, and it's just a wonderful story, and we explain it in the museum. If you come, we can share that with you. So, and finally, there is one piece that's floating around that I swear every month or every other month someone tells me I found this photo at an antique store or a yard sale or an auction, and it's a photo of the 1939 East team from the East-West All-Star game. It's the same photo, made to look old in old beat up frames, and it's the exact same photo. I swear at least once a month or every few months someone brings in this photo like they found this magic thing, and it's just a copy of the same photo, and it's all over the country. I don't know how it happened, but it's the exact same photo.
I can tell you how it happened.
Well, yeah, someone's copied it and sold it and kind of misrepresented what it was, or someone's trying to misrepresent what it was. And as soon as someone calls, I got this neat photo. Can I explain to you? I said, no, let me describe it to you. And then and they said, how'd you know? Because everyone calls me with this photo. So that, not looking for that photo, although I think it's still safe. It's always safe to check. It's always safe to check. You never know. You never know. People have brought things in and they found in old houses and they turned out to be treasures, and we've sent them to auction houses and they've been able to actually make some money off of it. But that's extremely rare.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I've seen that picture many times myself, and other similar. They just reproduced it. They just put it in a frame and put it out there. What it is. We had a lot of people watch. Jackie, Thomas, Andy, Rhonda, Jeannie, Keith, and Steve. All these people. Thanks for watching. You've talked about some really interesting things today, Raymond. And we're kind of getting towards the end of this, and I'm trying to think of a good way to wrap it up. There's a lot of things I want to go down this rabbit hole of, like the team signed baseballs. Did you find like a domed mirror to put underneath the ball so you could see the signatures on the bottom?
I tried that. I tried it, and it's not really working very well. I just got a small mirror to put under the bottom of one of them, so people and behind, so people can see. But that takes up too much space to
Right.
showcase the ball. I guess we're going to probably move that particular ball to a case on its own and try to just expand on the story a little bit. And if I can do the mirrors, that may help. But it's just a challenge for a museum to display that. But you just put it up there and then just tell the story. And they're still rare to have those multi-sign baseballs, and they're still neat pieces. So we have this balance between historical objects and memorabilia objects, so to speak, or things like quickly just share with you about, like the loving cup information that I share with you. It's a decorative art piece, but and beyond that, it may have significance in the decorative art world or may not, but it's supposed to have a tie to baseball. So I've got to tell, I got to make sure that I get enough information to tell the baseball side of that story, but also tell the decorative art piece story, just because that rounds out the full story of that item.
Right, right. I think it's also interesting, and I might just talking to you, thinking about this. I'm on a board of a small art museum. I should do a show sometime, almost like a panel discussion on what it takes to really run a museum and what happens behind the scenes and the costs and the logistics and the storing and the security and all those things. When I hear you talking about those things, you're considering what to or not to accept. I think a lot of people really don't have any idea how much goes into running a museum and what is in place to keep those assets safe and secure. Because
Right.
as you said before, you're a steward of public history, and it's entrusted upon you and the organization to keep those objects safe so that 300 years from now, people will still be able to access it as if it's today. Um,
Yes.
so I'm probably going to reach out to you again about doing that kind of a panel show about running a museum.
Happy to
Um,
do it. And quickly, just for folks, to understand that, don't just show up with your stuff, and just because you think it's valuable doesn't mean that it's of value or worthy for the museum or of museum quality. But a museum is there to help you, to at least help evaluate what you have, and
mhm.
get you on the right path to figuring out, making the best decisions about things that you have. But we prefer not to have things dumped on us. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's you're not a thrift store.
Exactly.
You're an association, an institution, and as such, you have different protocols in place. Raymond, I'd like to give my guests the final few minutes. We've talked a lot about things I've directed the conversation to. What are a couple of things for a couple of minutes that you want to tell people about either the museum, about Negro Leagues baseball, or around that that you want to share before we wrap up today?
Well, I think we've got renewed interest, again, growing interest in the Negro Leagues with the 100th anniversary and the attention and the increase in media attention that we've had. We hopefully will expect that to continue to grow. Museum is open for folks to come and see. Want to encourage folks that if they're coming across things related to the history and they're not sure about them, you're welcome to call the museum or ask for me, and we'll try to best guide you as to what you have, or how to evaluate what you have, so you can make an informed decision about what to do. I know a lot of folks are looking at things that they may have, and with our economic times, are really looking to sell things. And museum again doesn't really buy things directly in that way, but we will consider it, and certainly would ask anyone to consider any donations they would want to the museum. But we'll try to give you an honest assessment of that. Continue to look for things. Don't be afraid to call and ask questions. And if we don't have the answers, we'll try to direct you in the right way. Support the museum if you can through memberships, and buying things, and enjoying and helping to promote the history. If you buy a hat, you can certainly help teach the history to others who may have an interest. So we're here in Kansas City. We're an international attraction. Um, and we're trying to make Kansas City proud. And so we want to encourage everyone to come and join us in that effort.
Well, you definitely do make Kansas City proud. There's no doubt about that. The idea that the Negro Leagues were founded here and that the museum was founded here later, I think is an amazing thing. As Raymond said, if you have questions for him or for the museum, info@nlbm.com, or you can give him a call at 816-221-1920. Of course, the website is nlbm.com, pretty simple, Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. The shop again, NLBM.com/shop. If you like to be on social media, like a lot of us do, you can always find them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, Raymond, let me thank you again so much for joining us. And folks, thank you so much for watching us today on Behind the Gavel with Jason. We love coming to you every week and bringing you all kinds of interesting guests. Next week, we have Sarah Reeder, who's an appraiser from Virginia. She is a co-editor of Worthwhile Magazine. She created Silver 101, how to establish and understand the silver that you have, like Raymond talked about, understanding what you have in the baseball world. Understanding what you have there is so important too. You can always give our company a call at 816-283-3633 if you have questions about anything Raymond and I have talked about, previous guests, or questions for our guests in the future, or about estate or antique situations that you have coming up. Of course, I'd love to check out our website, kcauctioncompany.com. And if you have any questions for us, again, info@kcauctioncompany.com is a great way to get a hold of us. If you have suggestions for guests, we'd love to hear it. Raymond, thank you so much. Hope you have a great weekend. Hope your eye heals. We didn't talk about your eyes. Not that important in our conversation, but you're wearing shades, not because you're always cool anyway, but you're wearing shades today because your eye surgery. I'm hoping that heals up as it's supposed to. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.